start with just a little bit of a background. Again, sorry you guys are seeing the poor multitasker at work. Return to Freedom has backed a horse slaughter ban since our inception in 1997. That's when Return to Freedom came to be. We've played a role in the rescue and rehoming of more than 2,500 horses at risk of falling into the foreign slaughter pipeline. In 2002, our founder, Netta DeMeo, gave one of her first talks about horse slaughter and wild horse protection at a horse protection conference hosted by the City of New York Bar Association. And since then, Return to Freedom has lobbied lawmakers, worked to educate the public, generated thousands of letters and phone calls to Congress. That's what a lot of you all on this webinar have done. Provided testimony to congressional committees and galvanized celebrity support, all in support of a slaughter ban. In 2013, we joined as a plaintiff in a lawsuit to prevent the Valley Meat Company from slaughtering horses in Roswell, New Mexico, which helped end the effort to open that plant. In 2019, Return to Freedom and the national animal welfare groups in Washington, D.C. successfully advocated for the BLM to drop a change which would have increased the number of wild horses that could be sold, and that would have could have placed more horses at risk of slaughter. You'll hear about some of our other advocacy work along the way as I interview Chris Heyde, the CEO of a legislative strategy firm called Blue Marble Strategy. Chris started the first national bill to end horse slaughter in 2001 after going undercover at the Cavell International Horse Slaughter Plant in DeKalb, Illinois. He then passed the first state bill banning horse slaughter in 2007, which closed Cavell. He worked with the Texas Humane Legislative Network to shut down the remaining 2 plants in Texas that same year. Chris started his career working on wild horse issues and has worked with Return to Freedom in Washington, D.C. on federal policy since 1999. So please join me. I guess we can't clap. Please join me in welcoming Chris Heyde to our interview about the SAFE Act from start to finish.
Oh. Well, thank you. And I certainly want to thank, Return to Freedom. It is, yeah, I've worked, Return to Freedom was really one of the first groups, when I started the bill to end slaughter, because there weren't a lot of national groups, even around at that time, doing wild horse issues or even helping on horse slaughter. So they were one of the very first to step up and join, the national campaign to help protect wild horses and horses in general. At that time. So they've been championing me, and then I've been certainly really honored that they were one of my first clients, that brought me to help fight in Washington, D.C. It's been quite a few years now, so I've been really grateful and ready to start talking. So I'm glad to have Celeste on this. As a lobbyist, I usually am not used to just rambling on about myself. I like having that conversation. So I'm really glad to start talking to Celeste about this and kind of updating everybody on horse slaughter.
Yeah, so we're going to run the webinar kind of as an interview between Chris and I, and then you are welcome to, as questions come up for you, pop them into the chat or save them, and I'll make sure the screen bumps back to where we see all of us with our cameras and microphones off, but it's easier to use the chat function then. And we'll work through some of your questions that might come up throughout this conversation. So Chris, to get started, isn't horse slaughter illegal in the United States?
No, that's sort of the odd thing that we run into even on Congress. We've got a lot of members of Congress that think it has been banned because we've been kind of successful on some level where we've defunded it. And basically what that means is that since 2006, we've been getting language in the appropriations process, which prohibits the U.S. Department of Agriculture from inspecting horse slaughter facilities. So that basically has kept them closed in the U.S., but it continues to allow them to be exported. So that's why we're so desperate to get the SAFE Act. But kind of going back, California was the first. They did a ballot initiative, and that wasn't a state ban. So, kind of, if you heard me talk about Illinois, California did a ballot initiative, which was by the people, and that was in 1998 where they did it. But they didn't have a plant, but they did a ballot initiative. So that was in 1998. And then, as I mentioned, in 2007, we did a state ban where Illinois actually, we did I was with a group called the Animal Welfare Institute, which still exists, and I'm working with them in DC. They did the state bill and we closed it down there. But also, I realized there was a 1949 law in the books in Texas that actually said it's illegal to slaughter horses in the state of Texas, and that had been on the books. So I worked with the group, the Texas Humane Legislative Network, and we kind of got that ball rolling. But that was a state law, so the state had to actually enforce that law. And they did. They started the process, and you had to go through the courts, and the courts finally upheld it. And that was some legal wrangling. And finally, those kind of worked their way through the court, and the courts ruled that those plants had to be closed. So they all kind of came to fruition, and those plants closed that same year. And then, as you can see by that list, there have been some subsequent states have then banned. Well, I think Maryland actually is considering a state bill right now to ban thoroughbred slaughter, I believe, which is being led by the state thoroughbred groups. Florida has one, I think. You kind of have this labeling. There are some restrictions like that as well. There have been some other states that have considered bans, but I really haven't pursued those because we closed the plants. That was really the focus. We closed plants in Illinois and Texas, and that's why I turned the focus on the federal bills because it's a federal issue. You have to ban it federally. I didn't want to waste time and effort going through states, because it's a federal issue. And we really need to close the borders because wild horses are going to be at risk. Horses are going to be at risk until we can close those borders. And that's why we need the SAFE Act or something like that to stop the borders and the exports. So that's what the importance is, to get those borders closed. We've stopped it in the US. There's never been a market here. There was a little bit, from foreign restaurants and niche markets here, but it was always, actually, they would import it back. The meat would usually leave the US and then they would import it back through specialty importers. But it was always into high-end restaurants and niche markets and stuff like that. But it was usually always an export-driven industry. So that's why we really need something like the SAFE Act.
So that kind of leads us to how exactly, my thing is in the way. How exactly do horses fall into what we call the slaughter pipeline? And what is the slaughter pipeline when we say that?
Yeah, they fall into it from all kinds of things. I mean, it's really, there was a T. Boone Pickens, who was an oil billionaire, who came and testified for us many years ago. He's since passed away. He always called it like America's dirty little secrets, and it really is. That's how I also discovered it. I went to an auction even before I went to the Cavell International, and I wondered, why are these horses standing in this back pen in the back of New Holland Livestock Auction up in Pennsylvania? And a lot of them had been drugged, and they'd come off the racetracks, and they were really bad shape, and they just put them in the back. They come right from the track. And or the Amish, they'd unhook them. They were really in terrible shape. They'd unhook them from their buggies, and they just shove them back there. And they just didn't even want to go through the sale. And we try to figure out why, because I grew up in Amish country in Central Ohio, so I knew a lot of this community. And so I would talk to some of the local auction or some of the local rescues, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's the kill pens, the kill buyers. They just kind of put them right back in there, and and they sell them off into slaughter." And I didn't know about this. And again, having grown up in this area, and that's how they would just kind of fill this market, and they'd get their truckloads and send them off into slaughter, or free to good homes. That was another big thing. So they would just kind of collect them all because this is a demand-driven industry, and I think that's key. Whenever you hear these people say that this is such an important aspect of the horse industry, that's garbage. These people are taking them from people, they're buying them from people that don't know where they're going, innocent people that, if you get them from sales bars, you get them from riding schools, people that are going to sales and legitimately think they're going to go to a good home. And you get these kill buyers that are just taking them from good people that think they're going to another good person. Because these are good horses. These are really good horses that could go to a good home. Because this is a meat industry. They're not, as I always tell people, they're not taking the old, sick, diseased, cancer-ridden horses. This is a meat industry. They want a horse that is, that can be fattened up and sold for meat.
A horse
So, oh, sorry.
So a horse might come to the end of what is considered its useful life for anybody, or somebody might not be able to care for a horse anymore, or they could be excess from production of,
Breeding.
race
Yeah.
horses or show horses or whatnot, and they go to these sales barns. Um, but then there are killer buyers that could be or are highly likely at some or many of, I don't know the numbers of these sale barns. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, yeah, you can get overbreeding. You can get like, and I'll call the Quarter Horse Association out there directly. They're one of the most biggest contributors to this because quarter horse types are probably the largest number that are ending up in slaughter because the Quarter Horse Association, their theory is the more you breed, the more you register, the more they make as an association, and so they don't care what you keep. So if you breed 30 and you end up keeping one because that's the special horse, you can dump the other 29.
Mm-hmm.
And slaughter is a great dumping ground. And people may buy 10 or 15 out of that, but then that's the other 14 that are just going to get dumped. Now, those 14 can be great horses, but you got a kill buyer who's just there to buy them up and send them off to slaughter.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're not getting out, somebody may want them, but they're getting outbid by a kill buyer who wants to send them to slaughter. But if you get that kill buyer out of the way, if you get that slaughter out of the way, either that breeder stops breeding so many, which is what we need. They should stop breeding so many and let those numbers drop, which we've seen, or somebody buys them and they go on to have a good career. So slaughter really is so bad on so many aspects about that. So that's such a bad contributor across the entire horse industry.
And I just wanted to note that the horses in this image are these were at the Bowie, Texas auction in 2023. They were among 45 that had been gathered from the Apache Sitgraves National Forest, and Return to Freedom worked with other organizations to rescue this group in 2023, and they actually reside at Return to Freedom Sanctuary, and we call them our alpine herd. I think they are in some later pictures. You can see them a little bit older. I'm going to go ahead and advance, and there's a video I'm going to play of a couple of alpine herd stallions at the Bowie, Texas auction. You can sort of see how chaotic these places can be.
Now have, 56 half here, now have, do it 650, your man's out, now have, now 700, now 50, do it 750, now 800, 50, 850, now 900, now 1,000, give me 950, now 1,000, now 11, now 1,100, now 1,200, now 13, now 1,300, now 1,400, 1,500, now 16.
My Return to Freedom colleagues will tell you all that I am sort of a hard, cold, stone heart kind of scientist. And that video, just really, it's really hard to watch. So let's move on to, we've talked about some of the domestic industrial ways that horses could fall into that slaughter pipeline, but we also hear about in Return to Freedom's angle, because it's what we do, is how do wild horses and the slaughter issue overlap?
Yeah, and this is a big confusing issue. So hopefully this may take a couple of steps to get through because this is a very confusing issue that a lot of advocates, and I mean, I often have to try to explain this. I mean, I even had a U.S. Senator confuse this when I talked to him briefly on the Hill not too long ago. And I think somebody kind of alluded to it in a pop-up thing a minute ago. It kind of popped up and down real quick. Why, even the term wild horse is confusing because you have the wild horse as on the ranch, those that are on BLM land under the act are legally wild horses. those that may just be off BLM land on somewhere out are not necessarily legally wild horses in the legal sense. If somebody adopts a horse from one of the herd management areas, they get title to that horse for a year.
After a year.
That horse maintains that legal protection for that year. And within that year, if they end up in a slaughter within that year, that is breaking the law because that horse is still BLM property within that year. If after that year, even by a day, they end up in slaughter, that it means that title has been transferred to that individual that got that horse, then that means they can legally end up in slaughter. As much as we may dislike it, it is horrible. That's a problem with the law that we can discuss that later. And I know that's an issue for Return to Freedom. We'd like to change it. That's a much bigger issue, but legally, that's a problem. You have sales authority, which is a whole other thing. And that's another big issue that we've got problems with that was changed in a disturbing issue later on as well. Now, if you get in wild horses that were sold through the sales authority did end up in slaughter some years ago, and that was a big issue that we did get involved with, and that did cause a lot of problems. And there was some pushback because if you signed a contract and you got those horses through sales authority and they end up slaughter, you did break the law because you signed an agreement that those horses, to the best of your knowledge, should not have gone to slaughter. So you have that. If the BLM suddenly gets a bunch of horses and they suddenly end up in slaughter, then that's breaking the law because those horses are BLM property and that would be against the law. So you do have, it's very confusing and it is a wide range of things. But you'll often hear on the internet that the BLM is sending thousands of wild horses into slaughter. Nobody's ever been able to actually prove or document that. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It's the question, you've got to be able to prove it and document it. And we would be absolutely, please document it and show it and send it within that type of thing, with it. And it would be certainly something Return to Freedom would pursue with it.
Well, let me just jump in for a second.
Yeah.
Because this has been one of the more stickery issues. We do see horses at sales auctions where killer buyers are present that have BLM brands or Forest Service markings on them. And so there's a few reactions here. There's what Chris was just talking about, that there's 2 lines of investigation that need to occur. Well, 3. So 1, in terms of the agencies and their ability to respond legally. If that horse had been titled to an individual, like Chris was saying, even if it had been titled one day previous, and that individual took that horse to an auction and wanted to sell it, we think that that is pretty disingenuous and pretty awful, but the agencies cannot do anything about it by law and by policy because that horse is now considered private property of that individual because they received title to that animal. So that's a problem we're probably never going to be able to fix on the back end. We can't figure out a good way that the agencies are able to pursue because there's all sorts of protections and privacy concerns for individuals and the information that can be shared among agencies. So we get into a whole nother level of bureaucratic hurdles. So the best case scenario is to establish policy that protects those animals on the front end. So the BLM does have something you sign that says, I'm going to adopt or purchase this animal, and my intent is to purchase and provide a good home. My intent is not that I am going to allow this horse to go to slaughter. But that's not terribly enforceable. So Return to Freedom has been involved with, and Chris has been involved with some discussions with the agencies um, that have happened with multiple stakeholders. The board, the advisory board, has been in discussions with the agencies to talk about what can happen on the front end. In other words, what protections and policies need to be in place for that process of handing over a protected wild horse to an individual or an organization so that we're not having to catch anything off the back end. And then the other problem that we have with this is that we are frustrated by horses, by any number of horses ending up in the slaughter pipeline, especially protected wild horses. But then the agencies can essentially say, look, we can't do anything about it. And so then we end up talking at sort of cross purposes to one another. So again, the solution lies in the front end solutions, probably not in the back end solutions. So I just wanted to clarify that because it's something that I think a lot of us go round and round on trying to figure out where to plug in to make some sort of difference. And Return to Freedom is very much plugged in those early stages to try to not ever get to the point where horses end up in a potential situation that could result in the slaughter pipeline. We're going to get into this a little bit more in a few slides, but how many wild horses are shipped to slaughter?
That's the hard problem to figure out. We just don't know a number on any horses. That there is no count. When you ask about thoroughbreds, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, quarter horses, we always give a guess even on types. And, now that I've been doing this slaughter bill for 25, 26 years, you know, it was easier because there had been a study in 1997, that I used to reference when I started this, which was a little easier, that was done on transport to slaughter when I started doing a bill to ban double deckers, which we used. And it did a kind of a survey that we got. They did where I was able to get kind of quarter horse type thoroughbred. They figured the larger number were quarter horse types. But that's almost I'm not even guessing 35 years ago when that was done with it. We just don't know because the forms that they do, the slaughter forms that they fill out, they're so generic,
Mm-hmm.
that they fill out. They slide them under the doors and they often cross the border at night because they don't want to really take questions from anybody at the USDA, when they try to get out of the country, with all of this kind of stuff. So it's really hard to actually get great information on any of these things. Now, obviously, wild horses are very different because they've got a lot bigger brands. But we've also seen, these people are very dishonest. They'll glue down manes and things like that to try to hide, as much as possible, even from visual types of things. So it's very hard to get, thoroughbreds are a little easier. You can flip the lips on things. But again, stuff goes so fast to get an actual count on anything. Again, it goes back to the same thing with all of this. We're grateful the numbers go down. They've gone up a little bit, which we'll get into. But compared to when I started this, it goes down. But, again, it's just hard to tell on numbers across the board. It's impossible.
And can the BLM and Forest Service sell horses to slaughter directly?
No.
Okay.
No, and that's something we will get into, but no, legally, legislatively, in the law, they could, but we have to actually physically stop that every year. And we can explain that. I think we explain that right later. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I do want people to know I am seeing that a lot of chat questions are being put in. I'm going to get us through the next couple of slides because we might answer some of your questions, but I won't forget and I will open those up in the end and make sure we go through them and touch on what we've missed. So this is the SAFE Act, which is, what we're getting at today. So I'm going to have Chris talk a little bit about what this means because I think it will clarify some of what we were alluding to in that last slide.
I could, I was being more humorous when Celeste and I were going over this earlier. I could sum it actually up fairly quick. When I first did the very first bill for this in the beginning, it was much more detailed, much more complex. We went into several committees, and we'll kind of get into this in a couple of other charts. When you get, passing a bill in Congress is remarkably difficult, and that was 25 years ago. It's gotten much more difficult now to do things, and when you go into several committees, that makes it almost impossible to get it. So, we've learned with time to get more specific, try to get into one committee into doing it, so you don't have to fight to get out of several committees to get into it. Now, while you'll see some more text on this bill, I'll be what the SAFE Act is right now, it is basically one word. We are amending a law that was passed in the Farm Bill 7 years ago. Sorry, it's a bill that's supposed to be done every 5 years. They're now 2 years behind on that 5-year bill. We are adding simply the word dogs, cats, equines. We're adding the word equines. That's all it takes for human consumption. Now, I know, that's all horses are used for in the United States. When I first started this, horses aren't used in pet food. They have, the pet food industry, when we started this, are like, oh, don't loop us into this. We haven't been used in pet food since the 70s, because that was always the joke when you see it. Horses are turned into glue. They're used in pet food. The pet food industry is like, man, don't loop us into this one. We haven't been used in pet food since the 70s. The zoo industry is like, don't loop us into this. We don't anymore. There were some zoos that did some kind of custom, but that was also 25 years ago. With that, it's all human consumption. When we closed the plant down in Texas, the one in Fort Worth, I think it was called Beltex. I believe it was that. I can't remember. There was one of the two. They tried to reopen as a custom slaughterhouse for exotic meats. They closed down about 2 months later because there was no demand for it. They couldn't stay open to continue to do it. So they went out of business. So that's, we realized we didn't want to make this more complex. We've been in this for 26 years now. Let's end it. Let's not make it worse for us to try to do this. These are horses that are dying every day. This isn't about you or me. This is about the horses. Let's put our egos out of the place. Let's end horse slaughter. And I think that's the way we want to do it. Let's just end this. So that's why we're trying to simplify this, get it out of the way, and then we can take the fight to the next thing. So that's what the bill is. We just want to keep this simple, ban it for human consumption, put that one word in, get this thing done, move on.
I really appreciate that, Chris. It's working in the sort of policy realm. You're oftentimes, there's a lot of frustration around the process and why don't you do this and why don't you add this and essentially why don't you make it perfect? And the short answer is because then it will never happen. So I really appreciate the sort of steady strategic march that you're engaged in, and also appreciate that it can be frustrating and a frustration for sure for everybody. But there really is a method to the madness for sure. So we're going to go into a little bit of details. We've heard some people express concern, well, donkeys aren't listed specifically. Would this ban cover all equines?
Yes, yeah. We were very cautious because the very first one, yes, it was for horses. Because really that is, these guys are looking for, because horse meat really is a delicacy, and so, I've never eaten any of horse or equine or donkeys or mules, but they're looking for horses because that's, more tender, it's more, what they're looking for. But we realized with time is then to broaden it to make sure that if somebody would want a donkey or a mule or anything like that, if it would happen, we just simply took it up to the top and expanded it to equine, which would then cover all donkeys, mules, burros, anything within. Now you can clarify for me. I don't know if it's species or genus or whatever the top of that. I don't want to insult any of my Latin proper scientists within that, but we went to the top. because I know it gets equus and then there's equus something.
It's the family of equines. We're
It's
all
the
getting.
family of equine, which does then break out and spread down further on with that. And then as I said, for non-human consumption, again, they're not using it for anything else. Nobody wants it for anything else. The pet food industry said we're not doing it for anything else. The zoos have said we're not doing it for anything else. All of that kind of thing. If somebody pops up to try to do it for something else, then I'd rather focus on that 99.999% that somebody does it for something else versus add something that makes it a bigger mess, that throws us into other committees, that makes it for another, again, I don't want to make it worse for something that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
How
What
would safety
about
enforce? Oh, sorry.
since we list in the SAFE Act that these things are not allowed for human consumption, is there a threat that horses could end up at slaughter for non-human consumption reasons?
There wouldn't be slaughter for other, there wouldn't be other things you would slaughter them for. You could slaughter them, and there's always that thing. If somebody would want to eat them themselves, there's nothing you could do. Somebody could take their dog out back and do it. You could do that now for anything. If you took your dog into your backyard, even if there's a law on the books to kind of do that types of thing, that's something you couldn't stop.
What about I know there's concern for equines that might be slaughtered for things like zoo feed usages, and how is that involved in the SAFE Act or not?
There's nobody that's even doing. The zoos, they did that. There was one zoo, I think, at the beginning 25 years ago that did that. But even that point, the Zoo Association said we're not even encouraging that. They're moving away from it simply because horse meat in this country is not safe. Because of the medications and the drugs, he said they were encouraging them and they were moving away from it because of the toxicity and the medications that were being used in it. That it wasn't worth using it in food.
And then how would the SAFE Act be enforced?
It would be the same thing. Because if they're not doing it in the U.S., if they can't do it through a USDA inspected facility, nobody would be doing it. And if they're going across the border, they would be caught by USDA at the border, at border enforcement. So if they're dumb enough to go across the border with a truck full of people turning in documentation, going across the border with it. And if they would be going across the border with falsifying documentation, that's that. If they try to go across, they would have to then lie that they're taking them across for breeding or show. Then they'd have to have vaccinations. They would have to spend money to vaccinate them or to get veterinarians to lie on the documentation that they've given vaccinations. That would be a federal offense that they've lied on all of this documentation and then show up at a Mexican slaughterhouse. And there are animal groups that do follow these trucks. So, that would be a pretty shocking risk. Plus you're also going across the border with 30 to 40 horses in a trailer. Yeah. And the only reason you would be doing that would be going to a slaughter facility.
It is expensive to move horses across the border legally for just transport reasons. So paying for
so there's just no incentive
to
do it on a you would not be taking them in 7 horses across the border for slaughter like you would take them for show or breeding or sale or for other purposes.
You talked about this a little bit, but just reiterate, let's say we got this very the sort of structural ban on slaughtering equines for consumption along with the cats and dogs. The SAFE Act passed. Would there be ways to shore it up later if there were holes that were occurring?
Oh, absolutely, and that would be the easy part because this is such a popular issue. That's the point. If this is such a popular issue to get through, if you would find something then that would be much easier to go in and put a word into existing law to do it, is to say if somebody did something, is to go in and shore it up after the fact. And that's the point. That's the easier point, is to go in and put a tweak. And we've done that multiple times on things. It's easier to tweak something than to actually do the major component.
Yeah.
It's getting the major component through is the problem.
Okay. So here we go.
Yeah, and I think this is a great example. And as I pointed out to you, Celeste, this is only going back to 2014. If you go back to 2001, those numbers were almost 300,000, when I started this. And if you go back even further, it goes even higher, because when I started, there were 3 plants operating in the US. And just before I started this, there were 4 plants operating in the United States, plus the exportation that we took to Canada. And Canada would import horses to the United States. So central part of Canada, it would import horses to Cavell, and some would import them to the plant up in Oregon. And then Texas would export. Mexico would import horses up to the plants in Texas. So you had them going and flowing both directions with that. So you had a great number of horses going back and forth.
And so we see those are pretty big numbers in 2014, but they were bigger previous to that. They steadily decreased for a number of years. And then they've wavered a little bit at the end there, and they've bumped back up. And Chris and I were talking a little bit about this yesterday. It's not an insignificant bump. The general trend is good, but this trend in the last year, um, we don't want to sneeze at it for sure. Does it feel like there's something to be more watchful of?
And it's hard to pick the trend. I don't think it's an economic. We could say an economic issue right now, but I don't think we'd see, because of the current situation. We didn't see it. We didn't see it tied to economics, like in 2007 when we had, really, the economy hit a pretty rough times around 2007, 2008. We didn't see a huge bump tied to that as well. So I don't think it's an economics issue. It could just be a fluctuation around the world. American horses have always been desirable, simply because of the image. I think, as I told you, and I often tell it on the Hill, because of the actress Bo Derek, who's been a friend of mine, because of this issue. She's come to Washington and has lobbied quite often with me over the years. And I just talked to her this morning. She wants to come back to town. And she was in Switzerland eating horse meat. So, wait a minute, let me back up on that. Dear God, don't ever say I said that publicly. She was not eating horse meat. She was eating in Switzerland, and on the menu was American Mustang.
Oh, wow.
And she doesn't know, you have no clue, because it's not traceable or anything like that, because you have no clue what it was. But it was that perception, because Americans are, we're cowboys, and that Western image and that cultural icon that Americans are tied to the horse. And that. So I think a lot of it is that it's that, you're getting an American horse, kind of idea type of thing. So that could be what it is that, Americans have so many horses and they just love the horse type of thing. So that could be what it is. And I also think a lot of it is that you get the industry kind of wants to shove it in our face, is they're not going to let it die off here. Is that they don't want to back down and let the industry shrivel up with it. So they could just continue to do it. So I don't, again, I don't know what we can put our finger on why it would have bumped back up, or why it just hasn't shriveled up. We knew it would never completely disappear until we can get the SAFE Act. I think there will always be a market until we can get that SAFE Act or something like that passed.
So really, until we have that safety net, we don't know what these numbers are going to do.
Yeah, it's always going to exist.
Yeah.
The number, because it's a demand-driven industry. It's not because, it's not because there's too many horses. Our horse community can take the horses. There's not
Mhm.
25,000 horses sitting in the queue needing a home.
Mhm.
Because again, we had 300,000 horses and we're down to 25,000. They're not running down the streets. I don't have 50 sitting in out front of my house in Washington, D.C. You know, we dealt with it.
Mhm.
You know, there may be 1,000 in the queues right now. We can find them, homes for them. So it's just a demand-driven industry right now. So why that is happening, I think there's just that market for
Yeah.
them right now.
And I know that some people have expressed concern that the donkey hide trade might make more complicated just a straight ban on consumption. But I just want to point out once again, we need to get a simplified, strong version through first, and then you would work on anything that you were noticing, was a hole essentially. And there's also been some specific to the Izhao trade legislation that has already passed. And we actually just, Return to Freedom just did a webinar about that, and it is posted on our website. So we would encourage you all that are interested in that issue to check that website out. There was a lot of information in that one as well. I'm going to advance us. I'm trying to watch time. And so I'm going to get us through the last couple slides so that at least I'm hoping we have at least a few minutes so I can look back through some of these questions. And just to tell you all, these horses are the alpine herd after arriving at one of Return to Freedom's sanctuaries. So just getting released. And so what about all of these, quote, unwanted horses?
Yeah. And I think I can do this one quickly as I've kind of alluded to it. You know, this is a term that drives me nuts. This was a term actually created by the horse slaughter advocates. This wasn't even talked about when we first started bringing up this issue. This was created. He's still around. He's a veterinarian. I won't go into his name on this, but he comes and you can Google it. He testifies against the horse slaughter bill whenever we have a hearing. He pops up, like a mushroom in the dark every once in a while, to advocate against horse slaughter. He coined it. And as I pointed out, and his testimony is the very same. I always joke I want to create a meme where I'm looking over his shoulder because he gives the same testimony. And he's like, if you go back to the beginning, what are we going to do about all these 300,000 horses? What are we going to deal with all these? When he crosses it out, what are we going to do with 100,000 horses? What are we going to do with 50,000 horses? What are we going to do with 25,000 horses? Well, again, they're not running down the streets. Slaughter is a demand-driven industry. As these numbers have decreased, there are now fewer horses being bred, which is good. That's what we need, fewer horses being bred. People are keeping their horses longer. If your horse is old, they are being either humanely euthanized. If they are actually unhealthy and not able to continue their life, they are humanely euthanized, which is what most people do. That's the ironic part, is if they are old and not well, you don't put them on a trailer and haul them across the country to be slaughtered. You humanely euthanize them as you would with their dog. My beloved dog passed away just before Christmas. I couldn't fathom putting her on a trailer and sending her to slaughter across the country. Senator Conrad Burns actually had the nerve to tell Bo Derek and I that his beloved horse of 25 years or whatever it was, he put her on a trailer and sent her to slaughter. We were shocked that was his answer. That's inexcusable. So unwanted horses is not a term you should be talking about. It's nonsense. There are good homes, you deal with it. So I'm going to leave it at that. That is a nonsense term.
Well, is there enough support in Congress to pass the SAFE Act?
There is far than enough. We've always had enough co-sponsors in the House and the Senate to pass this bill. The Senate's a little tougher because sadly now in the Senate you have to always have 60 votes to pass anything. It's because everything's become so hyper-partisan in the U.S. Senate. You used to just need 51, just the simple majority to pass anything in the Senate. Now, unfortunately, because everything's become so partisan on everything, on both directions, you need 60 votes to pass. That means that's what you need to get over a filibuster. And early on we did have 60. Or I think our very first defund vote, I believe, was over 60. But ever since then, we have not had the 60. So you do. It's a little tougher in the Senate to get it, but we do on appropriations. We've always had the appropriations support to get it done. But we could move it. We just need to get it done and do it. But certainly in the House, that we do have overwhelming support.
Uh-oh. I'm trying to advance us, but here we go. Does the horse industry back the SAFE Act?
I would say uniformly, yeah. And again, I'm going to be very critical of the American, pretty much all the thoroughbred industry. As you see, the U.S. Trotting Association, which kind of the standard bred, they certainly do it, have all been very supportive. The thoroughbred industry has been they've been very supportive from almost day one, been very supportive from it. And they've also been, they've made changes. And I've been critical of things within the thoroughbred industry, but they've also listened. I do give them credit. They realize they've had changes. They need to improve things with drugging, and they have made changes on that front, and they need more to go. But they do talk. They sit down, they listen, have been very open to that with dialogue, and I am grateful for that discussion with them. And I had an article today on the Thoroughbred Daily News where they are open and talking about these things. So I do give them full credit in dialogue, because that's very important with that. But the American Quarter Horse Association, no, they dig in their heels because, again, they make money for the more horses you breed. Now, I don't want to make blanket statements. I have had board members who have come to me and been supportive, but they have not been able to sway the association itself. Veterinary groups, no, they do not support because they tend to be more aligned with the kind of the Quarter Horse Association. The equine practitioners have come and testified against the bill with it, which is unfortunate. You would think veterinarians. I would talk to your small animal vets or even your personal vet. I would talk to them. They often don't know what their associations are doing. My veterinarians have always been shocked to learn what their associations are doing. But they're busy taking care of their clients, so they don't always know what their associations are doing.
So here's the crux of the matter. The actual challenge of getting this onto the floor and passed. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what's the holdup and what is the opposition and how do we get this?
Yeah, I often get the question is, I get people that the ASPCA's done, I've done polls many years ago. ASPCA's done some. I think theirs are now a few years old, but they've done some good polls. 80%. I'll get people that call me, oh, my congressman supports this. And I see these polls, 80% of the American people want these bills passed. Well, look at these charts. You just see how many bills that are introduced every year. And these are just the last few years. And we're not even through the second session. Well, we're just into the second session of the 119th Congress, and this is how many bills have been introduced so far. 13,000 bills have been introduced. 507 have gotten a vote, and only 79 have been enacted. And if you want to put animal bills on that, you can see that. I'll put a big zero up on that one. And I would say zero can go all the way down that chart pretty much. I mean, we have been in some bills, appropriations bills, that we have been in some of those. So to show you the difficulty of those things, of what we face within that, and we generate a lot of calls. No, and I actually read that comment. I read that comment, and that has been my criticism of the animal movement. And I've been very vocal on that criticism, because the animal movement brags about 10 million supporters. That's often our tagline. But I often say we're also like 6 old people in a minivan when it comes down to it. because we often go out, and then when I ask somebody, and somebody called me and they got so mad, why can't we do it? And I said, who's your Congress member? And they told me, and they're like, oh, but we love how they are on taxes and we love how they are on healthcare. And I'm like, but they are horrible on animal things. And I'm like, don't tell me that you want them to support animal things when you vote for them when they're horrible on animal things. Don't blame me. You voted for them. So that's, and I'm going to be blunt to all of you. If you want them to change how animal laws stand, vote for them on animal issues. Period. And I'll be very honest with you. It doesn't matter what party they're in. If they're good on animal things, they're probably going to be a pretty decent human across the board. Now, be very careful if you get a member that says, I'm good on animal, I like my dog. It doesn't quite mean. Christy Nome claimed she liked her dog. And she didn't have a good answer. I feel safe on pushing her under the bus because she's now gone.
Only because of the animal thing. We'll stay out of everything else.
Yeah, I'm just going to pull that one point out. But there are some members that claim they're good on dog issues, but they're not necessarily across the book good on dog issues. But like our Vern Buchanan, Republican, great guy on animal stuff. Great guy on animal stuff.
But yesterday, you and I.
That's my.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, yesterday you and I were talking about sort of the secondary way to get these sorts of things passed when they're not attracting the attention that we would hope that they would.
Yeah. So that's my point on some of these things. You have to take a deeper thing. Don't complain that things don't get passed if you're not paying attention to who you vote for.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and I'm not saying this for Return to Freedom because they can't get involved in politicking. I'm saying this from Chris from Blue Marble Strategy because I can.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying this as an independent lobbyist for a for-profit group. I can say, and Return to Freedom is not involved in that, but I'm saying that if you want to make a change in how you do it, go out and look on who you're voting for in that sense, because that's going to make a difference.
What's it called when you sort of add on to another bill that is
well, yes, well, yeah. I mean, if you want to look how the SAFE Act can move, is that we have to look for vehicles that move, and that's how we're doing the SAFE Act. Is that we're looking. The SAFE Act is a standalone bill, was never going to move.
Okay.
So when we talk, it was a messaging vehicle that we're trying to attach it to the Farm Bill, because the Farm Bill is a must-pass vehicle. That's one of those in the enacted or will get a vote that we see there, and those are one of those bills that will move, and there are others that we will continue to always look for that will move.
I just got a message that says my screen share may have stopped. So in case that has happened, I apologize. On my screen, it says it is shared, but
I still see it shared.
We were on the last slide. Well, this is the last slide. Is the how you can help slide. Chris, you do see my slides up?
Yes, I see them.
Okay. Hopefully most people see them. This is sort of what this is the first unofficial wrap up of this. This is so that you have this information in front of you. I want to remind everybody that there are a number of ways you can take action, and that this information that is posted right here will be posted on our website, along with the webinar itself, along with a fact sheet, take action items, and addresses for Congress. So that's all going to be up on Return to Freedom's website by the middle of the week. But I wanted to take a moment just to thank everyone who continues to donate to our defense fund, because it is what allows us to do work like this. It supports our work on Capitol Hill, our grassroots advocacy work, and our litigation. And with that, before I do sort of a final wrap up, and then I'll open up the questions so I can see which ones we still might want to touch on. Um, Chris, when people are sending their thoughts to Congress and representatives, what is the effectiveness of a letter versus a phone call versus an electronic message?
No, I think they're all important. I saw one kind of pop up real quick there that I'll kind of address in this. They're all important. I think we even having all of us have probably done this a lot, and you do this over and over, with it, and you probably feel that you're just kind of throwing these into the air, and never feel that way. I think do all of these and continue to do all of these, even if your member is already a co-sponsor of these. Continue to send them every once in a while, even if it's not every week, if it's every month, send them, because as soon as you stop sending them, and if that office doesn't hear from even a person or a couple of people a month, then it drops off their radar. And then they're like, well, I haven't heard from anybody. It must not be an issue anymore. And it kind of drops out because they do collect these. And then they have staff meetings, and then they update their member. And their members like, well, I haven't heard about horse slaughter in a couple of months. It must not be an issue anymore. And then they don't start getting it in staff updates, and that makes a big difference. So even if so just continue to send them. And if you have I don't know if ours have a line, I haven't looked at it, to send a note saying, please talk to the committee and urge them to hold a hearing. Please talk to leadership and bring this thing up for a vote. Thank you for continuing to support this. You just keep doing that kind of stuff. And if, even if they're not friendly, just keep driving these things home every once in a while. Pepper it in, making a phone call, because it may be a different person answering that phone every day or every other week, doing that kind of thing. Switch to sending a postcard, send a letter. It may seem odd to send that postcard, and I'm an old school. I was a Hill staffer when I came to the Hill in 1995. And that was kind of almost pre-email at that time. We were still doing handwritten letters. And one of our first sponsors of the SAFE Act, he called it a Butterfinger letter. And it was because housewives, and I am getting old school when I still talk about that. But he said he would actually have his staff collect the handwritten letters because he wanted to read them personally, because in his mind, he said that's because the individual took the extra few minutes to sit down and personally take their thoughts to paper, not just slap an email and take 30 seconds and slap it out, and put it. He said that took them just 5 minutes. That's all it takes, and put a stamp on it and send it. But he took that himself and would read it in time. He said, I would pull out a couple myself and hand write them back, because they took that few minutes of their time to write me. So that's what's important. And I also we didn't put on here is also call that district office, and you can find it on their websites. We don't have it here, but you can find their district websites on their own congressional website. Some of them may have town hall meetings. Sadly, because of the kind of the hostility that's facing members, they've cut back on in-person town hall meetings, but some may still. Try to attend them, and be very polite. Please, the last thing we need is, lighting your hair on fire and going into these things about wild horses or horses. Be very polite and talk to them about this, because they do want to hear from constituents on important issues. If they don't have an in-person one, maybe do a Zoom call with them, because they are doing Zoom town hall meetings. They do want to hear from you about these issues, and get on one. Talk to them. Let them know you're a constituent, that this is important. That's a great face-to-face opportunity for you to talk to them, or even staff. So check that out as an opportunity, to get. So all of these are very important. Just kind of rotate through all of these, and then let us know. I think Corey put up his email.
Well, actually, we will, and we'll make sure that this is on our information that we post midweek with the webinar, and all of this information that's in front of you. Don't feel like you have to hurriedly write it down. we want to make sure that people, not everyone is a natural at reaching out to their representatives, and not everyone is comfortable with that. And we will, you can email us, our communications director. You can reach him at outreach@returntofreedom.org. We will also post that with this information. And we will take folks that are interested really in taking it to the next level. And we can set up some organized Zooms with folks that are interested in really more of the boots on the ground, real grassroots work. We can set up some sort of how-tos with Chris and with our communications team at Return to Freedom, and really talk you through some of these things in a little more detail. Maybe do some, postcard campaigns together, whatever we can think of to do together, because it's more fun to actually do that sort of work in a team, and two, if you're just not certain about things, we can make sure that we plug you in ways that you feel comfortable being involved. So we want to make sure you know that that will be available to you, and all that information will be posted on our website. I'm going to take off my screen share for the moment. If everyone could just please leave your camera and microphones off so that we keep our streaming smooth. If you have to jump off, totally understand. We're a little bit above time. I'm going to just take a quick look at some of these chats that have come in. I know that some folks from Return to Freedom have been on the chat answering questions, which I really appreciate and should have thought of that earlier. That's a good idea. But let me just skim through really quickly. I think a lot of these have been answered. All of this information and the webinar, again, will be on site. Sorry, you guys can tell I'm multitasking. Okay, I'm going to hope a lot of these were answered. But I would like to wrap up and just say that we are really grateful to all of you for participating, for the support that we feel at Return to Freedom, and with the work that Chris is doing from our members and supporters, and those of you on this webinar today. We are really grateful. Not only are these types of things possible because of you all directly, but all of the work that Return to Freedom does is possible because of donors and because of supporters and because people want to be involved and participate with us. I will remind you also that our summer season is starting very soon. You should check out our website. Lots of excellent things happening this summer, from further webinars to tours on site, photo workshops. I'm not even going to name them all because we're after time and they're all on the website. But we are really, really grateful for you, all of you. So thank you very much. Please, if we didn't get to your question, you sent it and we haven't answered, please email us. You can email me directly as well. I'm science@returntofreedom.org, or our communications team at outreach@returntofreedom.org. And if you forget those things, you can find them on our website. And many, many, many thanks, as usual, to Chris Heyde, who has had our back for a very, very, very long time. Thank you for today's information. Thank you all for coming. And we'll see you at the next Informed Advocacy webinar, which is in a few weeks. We'll get that information up as well. And it's going to cover wild horse behavior. So that'll be pretty interesting. Thank you very much, everyone. Chris, any last words?
No, and like I said, I think people can find me through my website as well, which is just my name, and I'm happy to answer any questions, as well, directly through my website, and connect through Return to Freedom as well.
Okay, awesome. Thanks
Cool.
again, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Have great weeks.